Test, test.
All right. Good evening and welcome to the Friends of Forbes 2024 annual meeting. To our friends that brave the weather here in the room and our friends at home, it is our privilege to be hosting tonight's meeting in the Coolidge Museum. Our evening will have a brief business meeting followed by a presentation that is sure to entertain and inform. I will now welcome Joellen McKenzie, our Friends President.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 43rd annual meeting of the Friends of Forbes Library. I know I speak for the rest of the board when I say that it's a pleasure and a privilege to support the work of the Board of Trustees, Director Lisa Downing, Assistant Director Molly Moss, and the library staff. Allow me to introduce the Board of Directors. Martha McCormick is our president. Chris Hannon, our former president, vice president. Chris Hannon is our secretary. Scott Monroe is our treasurer. Nicole Sibley, Serena Smith, Jackie Frazier, Eli Porth, Maxine Schmidt, I've said already, Susie Campos, and Ella Longpre. All right. Okay. We are always looking to recruit new members. Susie and Ella were welcome additions last year. Serving on the board is a commitment, but it is such rewarding work. In fact, tonight we will ask you to vote to eliminate term limits to allow board members to continue their work without interruption. We currently have 3 board members who have served over a 12-year term. I'm happy to report that last year our fundraising efforts were successful and we were once again able to offer substantial support beyond the scope of the library's operating budget to a variety of library programs and initiatives. So how do we raise the money? We have 2 major fundraising events each year. Last year, the longtime favorite Friends of Forbes Library Garden Tour raised just over $25,000. The Garden Tour Committee, led by Jody Rosenblum, spends a good part of their year planning for this event, and we applaud them for their hard work and for the funds they raise for the library. This year's Garden Tour will take place on June 8th. Rain or shine, so mark your calendars and save the date. Come support this important fundraiser. Our other major fundraiser, the Forbes Library Artisans Fair, raised just over $6,000. Over 30 artisans participated. Feedback from the public and vendors was enthusiastic, so this year we have increased the number of vendors to 40, and we will feature some family-friendly activities. Stay tuned for more details and save the date, Sunday, October 6th. Support from local businesses and organizations are critical to the success of both of these fundraisers. Our sincere thanks to all the organizations who have sponsored them. We are always seeking new sponsors for these events. In addition to these 2 fundraisers, we held several seasonal raffles, which together raised several $1,000s. In May, we received a Customer's Choice Community Grant from Florence Savings Bank for $5,000, the maximum amount. Thanks to all of you who voted for the Friends, the money we received will be part of the fund for the design and construction of the outdoor performance stage. If you are a Florence Bank customer, you can vote for us again until December 31st. Ballots are available at the bank or at the library circulation desk. We hold 2 membership drives each year, one in December and one in June. We would not be able to have the impact that we do were it not for the support of our friends who renew their memberships every year, who make generous gifts to the library, and who support our 2 major fundraisers, either by attending or sponsoring them. So how did we spend the money? I'd like to highlight some of the programs and initiatives we supported in the past year. First, I'd like to say a word about why you, as friends of the library, should feel confident that your dues, donations, and sponsorships are wisely spent. We have a collaborative relationship with the library director, the trustees, and staff that ensures that money raised goes where it is most needed and will have the greatest impact. Let me start with the director's recurring requests. We contributed $10,000 to the Book and Media Fund. The Friends' support is critical to reach the library's minimum spending requirement. We provide $6,000 for staff development so they can participate in continuing education and enrichment opportunities. We provide $5,000 for children's and young adult programming and $4,000 for adult programming. The $2,000 we contributed for community engagement will support library initiatives to connect with a broader cross-section of the community, as well as strengthen ties to current patrons through community-based events. We funded Museum Pass subscriptions for $2,000. We provided funds for the Volunteer Appreciation event, $500, and a staff appreciation event, volunteer appreciation and staff appreciation. We funded an annual subscription to Booklist Reader for $375 and a 4-year subscription for C.W. Marr's mobile print service for $2,190. And we will fund the annual maintenance of the fish tank, Paco's residence, for $2,100. In addition to these annual requests, the Friends funded $6,000 for a water bottle filling station, $2,000 to fund cataloging of the Iron Horse Project, and new book carts for $2,500. Our 2 biggest contributions were to the design and construction of the outdoor performance stage for $25,000. This is a project which will enhance library programming and be available for community use. And today was Library Giving Day, and we had pledged a match of up to $25,000. And I think you can look forward to a wonderful announcement about the success of today. As you can see, the Friends' impact on this beautiful library is significant. In this room alone, the Friends purchased some of the equipment that allows this meeting to be live streamed, an improved sound system, and new, more comfortable seating. A tour of the library would reveal that our contributions go far beyond programming, from Paco's roomy fish tank to the artwork we've purchased, from bookmarks to book drops, and soon a performing stage. The Friends have played a part in making Forbes the vibrant, welcoming community treasure that it is. On behalf of the board, thank you all for coming this evening. We look forward to another year of successful fundraising and growing our membership. The library can't have too many friends. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. At this point, I think I am
Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Monroe, the treasurer. I'll give a brief report on the year. Considering everything, we had a very good financial year in 2023. I'll speak briefly about our endowment fund, our income, and our expenses for the year. As for the endowment fund, it's been managed by Bartholomew since 2018, and we started this with a generous bequest from Kay Burnett of approximately $250,000. And we decided to have Bartholomew manage the money because they do the same for the library, and we were able to piggyback on sensible decisions already in place. In 2023, the combination of dividends, capital gains, and change in value amounted to an increase of nearly 15%. And we also received a small amount of donations dedicated to the endowment and contributed some of our budget surplus from 2022. We have a disbursement policy, and the board's policy is to make annual disbursements to fund library projects while preserving the capital and keeping pace with inflation. Our policy is to base the disbursement amount on a historical average for the endowment, which makes the disbursement amounts more predictable and consistent. The most recent disbursement was approximately $12,000, up from roughly $11,000 the previous year. And that's, I think, fantastic because that's a stable fundraising source for us in a sense. For income, we had an excellent fundraising year, and I say this for several reasons. Joe touched on some of these. The donations through Friends memberships, et cetera, were very generous, totaling just over $16,000. And we successfully ran the Artisans Fair for the second time in October, and this seems now to be one of our core fundraising events going forward, which is great. The garden tour was again really successful and raised about $24,000 after expenses, and Joe had mentioned the generous donation from Florence Bank through their ballots. As for the expenses, the endowment disbursements means that, in general, the amount the Friends has been spending to benefit Forbes has increased, and in 2023, the amount spent on just the core grant expenses was approximately $30,000. And in summary, because of our better-than-expected fundraising, we finished the year in the black. We made some of the surplus available to Lisa for discretionary spending, and we devoted the rest to the endowment. We're grateful that we've had such amazing support in 2023, and we hope for the best this next year. Thank you.
All right, at this point, I'd like to offer a proposed change to the Friends of Forbes Library bylaws. And basically what we're looking to do is, I'll read you the current language that we would like to change. Each outgoing board member whose term is expired shall give up his or her office upon election of his or her successor. Each board member may serve 4 consecutive 3-year terms. A retiring member may not be elected to the board for another term until after the lapse of 1 year. As you can imagine, this is very disruptive to the work of the board. For example, Martha does our newsletter, and she's done it for years. She does a fabulous job, and at the end of her 12-year term, if she took a year off, that work would be interrupted. We would have to find someone else to do it, which might be a problem. And other committees, our planning goes on months after months for certain events, and to have someone's term end and have them leave if they're chairing one of those committees would be really problematic. So what we propose is each outgoing member whose term is expired shall give up his or her office upon the election of his or her successor. Board membership has no term limits. All right. So would someone make a move for that proposal? Martha?
I move that we accept that as a change in our bylaws.
All right. Would someone second it? Nicole? All in favor? Any opposed? No? All right. Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, then let's see. The next item on our agenda is, Nicole, the presentation of the Board of the Officers.
It's my pleasure to announce our slate of officers for the upcoming term. Our President, Joellen McKenzie, our Vice President, Martha McCormick, our Treasurer, Scott Monroe, our Secretary, Christine Hannon. Congratulations.
Never seen this guy. Well, that was a very efficient meeting for an organization that I can attest runs very efficiently with amazing people. So thank you all for your continued service. It's a real pleasure to work with you, and your generosity makes all the difference between this being a library that functions to a library that really shines and can serve the community the best way it can. So thank you all. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening. Dylan Gaffney, local history specialist, is a Northampton native and has been working in Northampton public libraries for over 25 years. He was awarded the Massachusetts Library Association's Paralibrarian of the Year Award in 2018. He serves on the Northampton Historical Commission and served on the Northampton Charter Review Committee. He has presented at archivist and library conferences throughout the United States and helped produce and present local public history-related programs, concerts, exhibits, films, and walking tours through collaborations with the Northampton Arts Council, Northampton Open Media, the David Ruggles Center for History and Education, the UMass Public History Department, and Historic Northampton. Please join me in welcoming Dylan Gaffney.
All right, bear with me while I switch up technology and give us a little mood lighting, hopefully. So thanks to the Friends, a number of the things Joellen went through are things which directly benefit me in my work here. And it's just amazing the support I've received over the years to do all the things I'm so passionate about. So it really means a lot. So my name is Dylan Gaffney. Can you all hear me all right? I work in local history in the archives here at Forbes. I started taking on more and more responsibility in the archives in 2017 when the opportunity came to take part in a program called Community Webs. The Internet Archive started the program to allow public libraries to build web and digital archives of primary sources documenting local history and culture, especially collections inclusive of voices that are typically underrepresented in traditional memory collections. In the years following the kickoff of the Community Webs project, Forbes Library co-hosted multiple series of exhibits, films, workshops, walking tours, and community reads on themes of mass incarceration, the Underground Railroad, and the history of slavery in our region. These events and the passionate response of the community to them inspired us to continue seeking out collaborations and solidified our view that surfacing these stories should be a core value in our work as an institution. At the same time that we joined Community Webs, I began to explore the possibility of digitizing what we call the Judd Manuscript Collection, which is a collection of 60-plus volumes created by local newspaper editor and historian Sylvester Judd starting around the 1840s. The manuscript was originally purchased from the Judd estate by local historian James Trumbull and subsequently sold to the trustees of the library. It's been the property of the library since 1904, but use has been limited to a small group of academics and local historians who were aware of the contents and could physically visit during our few open archives hours. Those who knew of its tremendous historical value had discovered that it includes content documenting Indigenous lives, enslaved and free Black people in New England, women's labor, and the early abolitionist movement in the area. Here's Mr. Judd himself. Just a brief bio. Sylvester Judd Jr. was born in West Hampton in 1789 and went to work in his father's store at the age of 13. It's said that even in childhood, he had a passion for knowledge and the discipline for its systematic pursuit. Like many young adults, he spent a period of time rejecting the structure of the life and the community in which he was born, and later on in life judged himself harshly for his indulgences during this time. He kept a regular journal throughout his young adulthood and seemed to keep his intellectual pursuits separate from his family and friends. When his own sons began to follow a path similar to that he followed as a young man, Judd despaired for their future and that of a society which he saw as increasingly fragmented and unsettled. In 1822, After various failed attempts to make it as a farmer, his father, who owned a controlling interest in the Hampshire Gazette, offered to retire his debts and make him publisher of the paper, and Judd accepted. In the newspaper business and community, Judd found an outlet for unifying his private and public lives and became involved in local temperance and anti-slavery organizations and met George Bancroft of the Round Hill School. A close friendship with Bancroft coincided with Judd expressing support publicly in the paper for what was called the Working Men's Party, one of several radical parties which arose out of the vacuum of 1830s politics. This public support led to him being denounced by Whigs and Democrats alike, and frustrated with the divisiveness and factionalism of politics and the town, and mired in what can only be called depression, Judd quit the paper. He had come to the conclusion that, quote, his last effort to live in the world has failed. He began to devote himself obsessively to the past and to chronicling history, and began the work that makes up the bulk of the Judd collection. Sylvester spent his remaining time pursuing the history and genealogy of the area. He was known to walk 20 to 30 miles a day. He talked to families along the way about their homes and their histories. Upon returning from these walks, he noted everything he saw, plants, wildlife, landscapes, buildings, etc., and in its precise location in notes in his journal. Public historian and author Marla Miller described the Judd manuscript as follows. Sylvester Judd, in his transcriptions of historic documents, as well as the conversations he described with local residents, preserves extraordinary details that survive nowhere else. Because of Judd's meticulous, wide-ranging work, I was able to gain insight into the lives of laboring people that would never otherwise have been possible. Judd's notes preserve genealogical information about enslaved people that is found nowhere else. The Judd manuscript is almost archaeological in nature, with shards of evidence that can be unearthed via careful scrutiny. As it records, for instance, who had the first piano in town, who laid the first carpet, the sound of the geese squawking through Sunday sermons, and 100 other small details of daily life, a picture emerges that simply cannot be found in any other kind of more formal or systematic archival material. These pages, filled edge to edge with his notes, cross-references, sketches, and other materials, simply teem with the kind of details that historians crave but cannot hope to find, except in Northampton. So when you do local history, you have to get very comfortable with the fact that everything you learn and gather and research and curate and assemble or write about is built upon the labor of others. To that end, so much of what we're going to see tonight builds upon not only the incredible efforts of Mr. Judd, but upon the labor of our friends from Historic Northampton, who we assisted with the Slavery Research Project from 2019 to 2022, working closely with Betty, Emma, Marie, Sarah Lennox, and others to try to identify enslaved people in Northampton and try to describe their lives as fully as possible. Much of our knowledge of the early Black life in Northampton comes directly from the work we did on that project. Our work on all these projects inspired the libraries to work with UMass Amherst and the Pioneer Valley History Network to take a lead role in the 2021 Documenting Early Black Lives in the Connecticut River Valley project, which seeks to gather the fragmentary information about Black lives from the wide range of sources and archives in Western Massachusetts so that a whole might be perceived that is larger than the sum of all those parts. The project to date has surfaced over 3,500 records of or references to people of color, enslaved and free in Western Massachusetts from the 17th through the 19th centuries. These histories are being made available through the project's database and on the project's website. But we still know too little about the history of Black lives in rural and small-town New England and the places Black residents were able to carve out for themselves in these communities. With this project, we hope to uncover names, details of their lives, and some small sense of how people of color survived in the Connecticut River Valley before and after the abolition of slavery in Massachusetts in 1783. At the kickoff event for the project, UMass Amherst professor Gretchen Holbrook-Gerzina encouraged challenging the assumption of others, sometimes called gatekeepers, who might be quick to discourage a researcher interested in Black history, reporting that they don't have much or not thinking about ways that the records of white families might be useful to this research. Gerzina remarked that researchers, curators, and librarians should start from the perspective of presence. We knew from our previous work with Historic Northampton that records of the presence of Black people could be found in the archive, and that the most promising and productive of these resources was the Judd Manuscript Collection. So here we see Judd's diary account of Sojourner Truth speaking and singing at the funeral of his infant grandson. Judd was connected through his son Hall to the utopian community which had brought Sojourner to our town, where she dictated her autobiography. And though he does not name her here, we can establish with some certainty that this is indeed Sojourner. If we start from an assumption of presence, the primary obstacle to discovering and surfacing information in a collection like ours is one of access. We'd long dreamed of digitizing all 60-plus bound volumes of the collection to make them available to a wider group of researchers and the public at large. And when the Community Webs program began to explore funding for a digitization program dedicated to expanding the amount and diversity of locally focused community archives available online to users, the Judd Manuscript seemed a good fit. So here's a very typical Judd entry. He starts by describing the weather in May of 1836. A few apple blossoms appear and many red buds, blossoms on pear trees and cherries. Grass grows rapidly, and then at the bottom, in the evening, abolitionists met in the town hall to organize the Northampton Anti-Slavery Society. I was chosen secretary. I proposed this in order to get rid of being president. This is very much my own approach to committees. The secretary usually ends up being more work than any other position, as I'm sure the friends can attest. In December 2022, Forbes Library was among 5 public libraries in the Community Webs program to be awarded an NHPRC Archives Collaboratives grant to fund digitization of collections, which included valuable information on people typically underrepresented in the archives. The other libraries were from Brooklyn, Columbus, San Francisco, and New Brunswick, New Jersey. We are the first library to complete the digitization process, as Molly and I hand-delivered the materials in multiple shipments to the Internet Archives Digitization Center at Boston Public Library in 2023. So now that the volumes have been digitized and are fully available on archive.org, you can just search Judd Manuscript or follow a link on our website when it's back up someday. Our mission is to spread the word about their value and availability so that the materials within can inform and inspire new research and discovery. As an illustration of the value of the collection and its contents, it's useful to look at how the increased availability of this resource could lead to new discoveries in long-hidden collections. As an example, I'm going to examine how Judd enriched our understanding of one local Black family. So Judd devoted entire volumes to genealogies of local families, but the 600-plus page Northampton Genealogies volume contains, to our knowledge, only 2 Black families, both listed without last names. Here we can see the scans of these entries as they appear on archive.org. You can zoom in and out and turn pages and download and do all those fancy things. Our work on the Slavery in Northampton and Documenting Black Lives project gave us an increasing familiarity with the names of early Black residents in the area. So we recognized instantly the family names pictured here as those of Amos and Bathsheba Hull and their children, although Bathsheba actually isn't mentioned, but it says Amos, and then his children, Amos, Asaph, Margaret, Agrippa, and the second Margaret, because the first Margaret died very young. A Black woman by the same name of Bathsheba can be found elsewhere in our archives as a member of the Church of Christ during Jonathan Edwards' ministry between 1729 and 1750, in records recorded by Jonathan Edwards' own hand, alongside records referencing those he enslaved himself, Rose and Leah. This same Bathsheba also figures prominently in one of the biggest scandals of Jonathan Edwards' time in Northampton. In 1744, Edwards accused several white young men and boys of reading lewd material, possibly a midwife's manual, and harassing local girls about the information learned within. So here are Jonathan Edwards' notes from Bathsheba's testimony, where she states that she had seen Noah Baker, Timothy Warner, and Elkanah Burt reading a book they jokingly referred to as the Bible, and then read it aloud to the girls. What Bathsheba reported was, What was read out of the book was about women and about women having children, and it was exceedingly unclean and bawdy to the highest degree. When they read, they would laugh exceedingly and catch hold of the girls and shake them. As Historic Northampton writes in the page for Bathsheba on the Northampton Slavery site, if this testimony refers to Bathsheba Hull, there are a few details here that could suggest more about her life. The record of the case states that Bathsheba was Major Pomeroy's servant, probably referring to Ebenezer Pomeroy, which indicates her enslaver. The document also suggests her age. In both instances, either the recorder or the speaker refers to Bathsheba and the person she was with as girls. This would indicate she was probably around the same age as the other girls mentioned, who were 25 and 17 respectively. This age matches what we know of Bathsheba Hull. So here's a Northampton tax valuation from 1747, also from our collections, just 3 years after the Bad Books incident. You can see Ebenezer Pomeroy is listed near the top. Next to his name, a series of columns listing houses, land, outbuildings, oxen, cows, horses, swine, and finally, slaves, with a 1 in Pomeroy's row. It's the second row down. If Bathsheba Hull was indeed enslaved by Major Ebenezer Pomeroy, the father of famed patriot and local resident Seth Pomeroy, as evidence suggests, this could be her represented as property in the Northampton Town Accounts record. If you haven't had the chance to read Gretchen Gerzina's 2008 book, Mr. and Mrs. Prince, you must. It tells the remarkable story of Abijah Prince, a veteran of the French and Indian Wars, and his wife Lucy Terry, who was the first known African-American poet. It reveals a history of slavery, black life, and black networks up and down the Connecticut River Valley. Here we can see Abijah, who comes to live with the Hull family while working for the Hunt family from 1752 to 1754. Amos is described here as a servant of Hunt's brother, and the crucial years cover the beginning of Amos and Bathsheba's family life together, noting their first baby, born in September 1754, same date we saw in the genealogy record, and mentioning that by 1756, Amos Hull was renting a farm and had some livestock. Here in the lower left, 4 or so up from the top, 3 or 4, is a record of their first child, Amos Hull Jr., being baptized into the First Church in Northampton on September 15, 1754. And here, in a tax valuation document I just discovered in the archive last week, confirming the information in Mr. and Mrs. Prince, we see Amos Hull listed as owning 1 horse, 1 cow, and 2 swine on a lot that is not owned by him, as they mentioned he rented, on a sheet that also still holds a column for slaves. We know from other entries that Amos and Bathsheba first lived by the river near what was called Welch End or Welsh End, which is an old name for this neighborhood, West Street. We believe their home was located near the bridge over the mill by the Smith Gym and athletic fields. Their family eventually moved to a home on an island in the Mill River near Old South Street, as we'll see in other documents. This entry, which Judd transcribed from Ebenezer Hunt's account book, shows items purchased by Amos Hull: hats, wheat, molasses, sugar, corn, wool, as well as the services that he would perform in exchange for the good received: threshing, mowing, dressing flax, etc., and the rate at which he was paid. It notes that in 1761, the same year their daughter Margaret was born, Amos Hull died. This info is backed up by an entry in the First Church records noting Amos's death. Afterwards, his widow Bathsheba paid for his and her accounts by washing, as you can see in the bottom lines here. Bathsheba surely would have had a difficult time supporting multiple children without her husband, and documents subsequently found elsewhere in our archives and in other institutions prove this to be the case. By 1762, the very next year, a document found in our archives records their son Asaph indentured to Ebenezer Pomeroy's son, Seth Pomeroy, who's well known for his service in the French and Indian War and would go on to fight at the Battle of Bunker Hill and achieve the rank of Major General. Again, from the Historic Northampton Slavery Project, it is unclear whether this indenture was his mother's choice. His paperwork suggests that it was not, since Bathsheba is not mentioned, and it was the Board of Northampton's Overseers of the Poor that ordered his indenture. The paperwork refers to him as a poor child and implies that the arrangement is for his own good, but gives no proof as to the economic circumstances of his family and makes no mention of the harm that removing him from that family would do. The fact that his father had died in 1761 was not mentioned. His mother was a landowner by this point, but being a single-parent household run by a black woman could have greatly influenced the town's decision to remove him from his home. Asaph Hull died on January 10, 1766 in Connecticut, cause unknown. He was only 10 years old. Bathsheba and her family come up again in several entries in Judd, including multiple mentions of the town seizing her land and displacing her from it in 1765. Here we can see a diagram of the land which stood on a small island between the Mill River and what was called the Mill River Trench, which is just above what was then the South Street Bridge, now Roundhouse bus station parking lots, right by McDonald House, down near the convenience store there. Right on the edge of the bike path is where we believe the island was. Again, we must acknowledge the scholarship of others, including local historian Skye Sutton, who wrote of Bathsheba's Island. In 1765, Northampton took Bathsheba's Island away from her. Bathsheba had paid in good faith for her acres. Squatters had taken money for what was not theirs. When Northampton decided to claim what it felt it owned, Bathsheba fought back. In 1766, the matter was decided by committee in favor of the town. Money to purchase the land from Bathsheba was authorized, even though the land was seen as already belonging to the town. This generous gesture is stung with a violent amendment. If Bathsheba had been unwilling to accept the monies offered by the town, the committee was ordered to attack Bathsheba's home. They were to demolish and abate the same in such a manner as to render it uninhabitable. So just in the past week, again, we came upon an additional mention of Bathsheba in the digitized records of Northampton's First Church of Christ. We own the physical records, but those two have all been digitized, where she is excommunicated from the church the same year that the city moved to take her land after, quote, repeated acts of stealing, fornication, and lying. Fornication, she remarried after the death of Amos, and it could just simply be that. It could just be that they hadn't been married yet. It comes up over and over again in court records at this time when they want to punish people. And I will say that I was just talking with a researcher in the Hampshire Room about how uneven the punishments were when they handed out lashes. The women get twice as many every time. It's just again and again and again. You see this, especially when it comes to those crimes. So, having lost her land and her place in the church, Bathsheba's family are essentially forced from the town. Bathsheba and Amos's son Agrippa would relocate to Stockbridge, Massachusetts, to be fostered by the family of Job Binney. In this early church record, I know you can't see it there, but Job is down in the bottom left, and Bathsheba is on the top right. We find the names Job and Bathsheba as members of the church. Job Binney had gone to Stockbridge from Northampton, where he had been enslaved by Jonathan Hunt III, the uncle of Ebenezer Hunt, who ran the store that Amos was buying the materials from. As historic Northampton notes, it is probable that he was the only enslaved person in Hunt's household at this time, although Hunt would later enslave a second man, Amos Hull. It's unclear from various accounts how and when Job attained his freedom, but what is known is that when Jonathan Edwards left Northampton for Stockbridge in 1751, bringing his slave Rose with him, Job followed. Jonathan Edwards, who himself had owned at least 4 slaves, wrote that slavery was a necessary evil that served some positive good in the natural order that God had decreed. Edwards, like many New England enslavers, would use the term servant for those enslaved. As historic Northampton wrote in the Slavery Research Project, indeed, enslaved persons were commonly referred to as servants, particularly in New England. As we have experienced in this research, this has the effect of obscuring the enslaved population in public-facing documents by grouping them with indentured servants and free people employed in service jobs. Since some people did refer to slaves, we know that it was a term in circulation, and this points to the frequent use of servant as a deliberate choice to rhetorically push away the reality of what enslavers were doing to their fellow humans. The choice to refer to Black and Native people without their full names serves further to deny their humanity and to erase them from the record. In 1751, Joe, Binney, and Rose were married in Stockbridge, and when Jonathan Edwards leaves Stockbridge for Princeton, New Jersey in 1758, Rose does not go with him, suggesting she was now free. It is in Stockbridge where Agrippa Hall, son of Amos and Bathsheba, would enlist in May of 1777 and serve for the remainder of the Revolutionary War in the Continental Army, including witnessing the surrender of British General John Burgoyne at Saratoga, New York, during the winter of 1777 at Valley Forge, and taking part in numerous crucial battles over the course of the war. He served as a personal assistant for the famed Polish general and revolutionary Tadeusz Kosciuszko, and became a close friend of the general during their 4+ years of war service side by side. Agrippa's story and friendship with the Polish general, along with Kosciuszko's friendship with Thomas Jefferson, is examined in Gary Nash and Graham Hodges' 2012 book, Friends of Liberty, Thomas Jefferson, Tadeusz Kosciuszko, and Agrippa Hall. There's a great story to illustrate their friendship and connection. So one of Agrippa's tasks was to care for Kosciuszko's belongings in camp, keep his clothes looking right, especially his dress wear. So on an occasion when the general was called away, Agrippa and a group of Black soldiers were holding a party around a fire, and Agrippa dressed up in Kosciuszko's regalia and was imitating the general. So just at that moment, Kosciuszko comes back to the camp. Instead of berating Agrippa, the general played along and either saluted or addressed a horrified Hull as if he were indeed the general, saving Agrippa further humiliation. They would remain friends for years and reunite many years later. Nash and Hodge posit that it was a result of Amos Hull's friendship and shared experience with Kosciuszko that he, in turn, took his friend Jefferson to task for his hypocrisy in declaring the freedom of all men in the United States while Black people were still in bondage throughout the new country. In 1785, Agrippa Hull bought a half-acre lot just across the Housatonic River from Stockbridge. He added to his land holdings over the years and went on to become the most prominent Black landowner in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and is buried along with his wife and children in Stockbridge Cemetery. Here's a map of the properties of Agrippa Hull, Joe Binney, and their friend and neighbor Elizabeth Freeman, often known by the name Mumbet. While Agrippa Hull is somewhat well known locally for his historic war service and connections with notables of the time, I believe it's just as important to learn more about folks like his parents and siblings, about Black farmers and mill workers, and those who were warned or driven out of town on the account of their poverty. This is just one brief example of the elaborate web of information that can be revealed when we prioritize the surfacing of stories that had previously been hidden in our collections, increase access through digitization, and collaborate to research and promote the information within. Black families and individuals sought out a network of connections to survive and to build lives for themselves, and we must put together a network of resources if we're to do their memory justice. As Marla Miller wrote in her letter of support for the Archives Collaboratives grant, we can hardly wait to learn what else remains to be discovered. Once available in digital form, available for scouring by researchers with their own wide range of questions, these materials will certainly spark, inform, and enrich generations of new research. It's almost impossible to predict all the way the volumes might reshape historiography, as well as conventional historical wisdom, because the contents at present are comparatively difficult to ferret out. But to be sure, these volumes have the potential to transform local and regional historical understanding, and once digitized, will certainly come to the attention of researchers nationwide. Thanks.
Thank you, Dylan, so much. That presentation is amazing. This work just continues to grow. I've heard earlier iterations, but I'm so excited, especially about the digitization of that Judd manuscript. We have time, I think, for a few questions. Would anyone like to ask a question? I will either repeat it back on the microphone for our friends at home and for everyone's benefit.
blacks in Northampton can affect what we're doing today in Northampton. Like, it seems like it's really important history and really remolds our vision of the town. So maybe do you think it can affect how we move forward as a community?
I mean, I certainly hope so. Oh, you want to repeat it?
Yes. So that was a beautifully phrased question, which I will just paraphrase to ask: how does this change our understanding of who we are and how we might move forward as a community?
Yeah, I hope that it can. You know, I hope that it can in terms of all sorts of people who don't historically find themselves in the archival record. I think we need to take a very clear look at ourselves and our history and figure out where we go, where, you know, that line, it didn't strike me when I first read it, but where Judd's talking about the fractured community that he's in, that resonated with today in a lot of ways. And I think we have to be honest when we look at these things. This project particularly, in documenting Black lives, we've had a lot of discussions with the Northampton Reparations Committee who are formed and looking at things. And when people hear about things like reparations, they tend to have a very simplistic view of what it could mean. They immediately think, oh, but this is money being redistributed. But some work could also be done just to do work like this and just to tell the story. So that, I mean, as a library, I think we're a public library, we want people to see themselves in everything we do. So I think that for us, that's the biggest power, is just like, you're welcome here. This is you too, you know. It might not seem like it. When you walk back there, you might see a lot of colonial documents. That doesn't mean there isn't information about all of us in there.
Thank you. Another question?
Yeah.
The digitalization project of anything, I'm just wondering how you do it and who does it all, and you know what it entails to get all of that information onto the
So this is my favorite kind of grant, because other people handle the money and do the work. And we just deliver things, and you know, we did have to do a lot of work providing metadata for it. But for this project, it meant bringing the volumes, which are large and fragile, and that's one of the reasons we want them digitized, to Boston. And we got a tour of their facilities. They have these incredible facilities, and they're literally just have hired people who are experts who are just turning page by page and taking high resolution photos, and then copying it to like many, many types of formats. For some of their materials, they can OCR them, meaning character recognition, and then you could search them. We're not there yet. Not a huge fan of AI, but for recognizing cursive handwriting from the 1840s, it could get there someday. So that, does that answer? Yeah, it's really amazing to see the setups they have there, and they have welcomed us to send them more things and encouraged us about all sorts of other funding opportunities. So.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just curious how it came to you. Was it left behind in the will, or how did you process?
So the question is, how did we get the Judd manuscript?
So there was a historian named James Trumbull who wrote the history of Northampton, and in the early 20th century, he was connected to Forbes in a couple different ways. We were acquiring a lot of local history materials in the first 5 years of the 1900s. We're a relatively new library. They were very forward-thinking about acquiring things in those early years and building an archive. So Trumbull received it or bought it from the Judd estate directly, and then he sold it to the trustees. I always thought he gave it to the trustees, but I found in the records that he sold it. I don't know the price, because that's not listed in the report.
Well worth it, I'm sure, at any price, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris.
These volumes are arranged in chronological order, is that right?
I wish.
How are the volumes organized?
In the most idiosyncratic, Marla found very nice ways to say things about how it's organized. It's really hard to get into, and it's why it's also been limited to academics so far. So he'll have, say, 7 volumes of Northampton. There'll be Northampton 1, Northampton 2. He just jumps from subject to subject. He leaves gaps, which he then fills in. If he doesn't have room, he writes these tiny little subscripts that have notations about where else you can find information about the same thing. So when we found information about an enslaved person named Mida, we could follow the little breadcrumb trails and see, oh, he bought a hat from Ebenezer Hunt. Oh, he played fiddle at a local dance. So it's all this just web of getting in it, but it does take time, which is another reason that with limited hours, we need it to be online. There are subject headings at the top of every page. There's volumes for Hadley and Springfield and South Hadley and other towns in the area. And then there's just Massachusetts and Connecticut and miscellanea. And it's an incredible resource for the natural world because he's writing about temperatures, when plants are blooming, which animals are seen, which animals are hunted. Prices, one of the best things he did was record prices all through time and what people were paying. It's just this incredible record, including what was really useful to Marla was that what women were being paid for pre-industrialization. There was a lot more work out of the home, a lot more craft work that was an industry, and what they were actually making for money for that, which is really hard to get to in a lot of historical records. So it's hard, but we do have dreams of having a crowdsourced transcription project for this. Prior to the digitization, we worked with 2 UMass classes, a UMass Digital History class and a UMass Public History class, and with the Library of Congress, who have their own very robust crowdsourced platform, which is open source. So we investigated whether we could port their system over to us, which I think is a great way to go. It's just, how to start. We have the files now. How do we set it up? How do we, if he's drawing a map, how do we have people write that in a diagram? So there's a lot of little things, but that would ultimately get us a lot closer to making the information findable.
Good questions. One more? Does anyone else have a question? Great. Well, thank you all, and thank you, Dylan, for that wonderful presentation. There are refreshments out in the gallery, so and we hopefully have a little time to mix and mingle here before we close.